Okay, this is actually quite a fantastic problem. What we are dealing with here is that we've got what we're trying to prove. Let me just highlight the figures that we're trying to prove congruent here. They're asking us to prove that QET, which is this, is congruent to QEU, which is this triangle and that triangle are congruent. Right now, we've got some good information on those two triangles. We've got an angle that we know is congruent, and we have a shared side, that Q to E side. But then when we get to there, we're kind of stuck because we actually really can't go from there. So what we need to do, we'll leave that aside for a second. What I'm going to do actually is I'm going to draw those down here just separately a little bit. I'm going to say, oops, doing red, this triangle right here, which is Q, T, and E. And I'm going to draw it in blue down here, just slightly separated so we can look at them separately. Q, E, and then U. Those would be the two triangles. I'm going to mark what we know. We know that that angle is congruent to that angle. And we will eventually fill in that side QE is congruent to side QE. Since we're writing as a proof, I'll wait till we get to there. But what am I really getting at? Well, what I'm really getting at here is that in order for us to be able to do what it is that we're trying to do, we need to take a look at what we know about this triangle and this triangle. That's going to help us establish the information that we know. Okay? Because on those two triangles, we've got, I'm going to use my laser pointer here. We've got, for the green triangle, and let me highlight it a little better in green. I'm going to highlight this one in yellow a little bit better. We can just talk about them. Okay. What we know is that this angle here on the green triangle is congruent to this angle on the yellow triangle. This triangle on the green, this angle on the green triangle is congruent to this angle on the yellow triangle, and they share a side. So let's first, given that information, let's establish that those two triangles are congruent. Why do we want to do that? Because if we look down here at the bottom, and by the way, we've got a lot. I know I've drawn all over this thing now, but down here on the bottom, we know that this side is reflexively congruent to that side. But we also know on this triangle up here that once we establish the green triangle is congruent to the yellow triangle and corresponding parts are congruent, that side and that side are congruent. That'll allow us to establish that that side and that side will be congruent. Then we'll have side, reflexive to itself, angle given, side, corresponding parts of these two triangles will be congruent. Okay, so how are we going to write it? Let's first start by saying 1. What do we know? We know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, and angle 3 is congruent to angle 4. Given information, given. Okay. From there, too, we can continue on. What we're doing right now is we're proving that the green and the yellow triangles are congruent. And you can see here, we said that angle is congruent to that angle is congruent to that. We're now going to establish that QB is congruent to itself. So we say side QB is congruent to side QB. And that is the reflexive property of congruence. I'm just going to write it like that. I tend to get really sloppy when writing that word, so I'll just leave it like that. Now what we know something about those two triangles. We know that triangle BTQ is congruent to triangle BUQ. How do we know that? Well, we had angle side angle congruence. Okay? How does that help us? What we're trying to establish here is that this side is congruent to that side because the triangles we're trying to prove, these down here in the red and blue, they also have those sides, here to there to there. So we can actually state that. We can say, okay, then we know number 4 that side QT is congruent to side QU. And how do we know that? Because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Cool. We already know for these two triangles down here, the red and the blue, that I've separated off, that are on the original QET right there, QET and QEU, which are the ones we're trying to prove. We already know that angle 3 and angle 4 are congruent. That was established up in number 1. Okay. We have just established that this side QT and this side QU are congruent. The last thing that we're left to do, by the way, let me mark it now that we established that. We've established that is congruent to that in this last step, number 4. And let's now finish it off by establishing that this side is reflexively congruent to itself. So we will say 5. What is that side called? That side is called QE. QE is reflexively congruent to QE. Why do I not have to change the vertices position? Because actually, if we were to rotate the blue one, flip it over onto the red one, we would see that those vertices line up. So we don't need to reorder them to name them. Those are the corresponding vertices. How do we know that that's true? That is the reflexive property of congruence. Once we've done that, now let's look at what we've got on these triangles. We've got a side, included angle, and another side. Side, included angle, and another side. So now we're at the point where we can actually state what we were trying to state, prove what we were trying to prove, that triangle QET is congruent to triangle QEU. How did we state that? Or how did we prove that, rather? We proved it with side angle, side congruence. Seems like a lot of steps, but really pretty reasonable in terms of knowing what we can do. How do you attack this problem? Well, you really try and know that there's multiple triangles being formed, not just the ones that you're trying to prove. So if you can establish that some of the other triangles are congruent and then go from, well, then we know all of their corresponding parts are congruent, we can find something out about our triangles that we didn't know before. So sometimes you need to do, as a first step, proving two other triangles, like this green one and this yellow one, that they're congruent. Then we can use that extension of that information that their corresponding parts are congruent to tell us something about the ones we're trying to prove. Hopefully that was helpful.